So as we referred to at the beginning of the day, we started this organization, myself, friends and colleagues in the industry, in 2011. And really since that day have focused on how do we provide opportunities like this event, but also like our fellowship program throughout the year. And so as we were putting together the scheduling for this year's program, one of the key things we thought about, which is going to be our next panel, is what is programming that could be useful, not just to understand the direction of NASA or our nation space program or our international competitiveness, but things that are maybe a little more relevant to your next weeks and months and years of your careers, figuring out, well, where's your next job going to be? And so before we move into that panel, which I hope will be very entertaining and exciting for you all, I'd like to again just recognize how grateful we are to our sponsors for this event, companies like Advanced Space, Astroscale US, Blue Origin, Bryce Tech, Firefly Aerospace, Hogan Lovells, Rocket Lab, and Virgin Galactic. As we are thinking about the next topic of our session here about jobs in space, I'm going to go on a limb and say that most, if not all of those great companies are hiring, so please take the great advice from this next panel, go to those websites and look for opportunities. And with that, I'd like to invite Tiffany and our panel, if you could come to the front. I think this is going to be a great discussion, very much looking forward to it. So if Tiffany, you could join me and introduce our next panel. Thank you so much.
I'm going to invite my panel to come on up as we get situated. So hi, good afternoon. I'm Tiffany Russell Lockett. I am a co-founder of the Patti Grace Smith Fellowship Program. I saw the Hailu in the crowd this afternoon. And I'm also an engineer at NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. And I'm here to talk about what's next, how to think through your career. I thought it was great that Associate Administrator Free talked about how his career seemed as if it wasn't as planned. And that sometimes that's natural. And when you think about where you go throughout your career, where you start, where you are today, as you are doing your fellowships, as you're doing your internships, thinking long-term, 30, 40 years down the road, that can seem really daunting. But if you look at it from a matter of what is it that I can do the next step, and then the next step, after a while, you've realized you've been doing some really great incremental things, and you're on your way to doing some really awesome things. So I'm here to introduce our panel and get started. So I'm going to start to my left. And Lauren, you want to go ahead?
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Smith. Mic check, is it okay?
Just the
It's okay. All right, we're good.
Yeah,
Just so you know, you all need to press your button so that it works. My name is Lauren Smith, and I currently work at Northrop Grumman. I'm the program manager for our in-space refueling portfolio. Really excited to be here with you guys today, and I'm also a former fellow of this program, so happy to be back and really excited to get to meet some of you. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Rikhi. I work in autonomy safety at an advanced air mobility company in San Francisco, California. I'm a 2019 Brooke Owens Fellow and an Aviation Week 2020's laureate. I graduated from Georgia Tech in 2022 with my bachelor's and master's degrees in aerospace engineering. And outside of work, I am really passionate about exploring the intersection and the concepts of leadership, equity, and wellness on my social media platforms, my podcast, on panels like this for organizations like NASA, on publications like Marie Claire Magazine, and at some of the prestigious universities that some of the fellows here are from, like MIT and Stanford.
I just want to say I love your shoes. Hi everyone, I'm Kate Tice, Senior Manager of Quality Systems Engineering at SpaceX. I also moonlight as one of our rocket launch webcast hosts, which is a lot of fun. I graduated from Penn State in Industrial and Manufacturing Engineering. And outside of work, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I feel like all I wanna do is just sit at home and scroll. But when I have the energy to do other things, I love working with local middle schools and high schools to do presentations, to just like get kids excited about the STEM fields. And I also volunteer at a wolf and wolf dog rescue in North Los Angeles.
Hello, my name is Greg Miller, and I am the Dean of Space Education for the U.S. Space Force. I think the agenda says I'm at SAIS, which is true, I teach at SAIS, But my employer is the U.S. Space Force. I help run the Space Force's professional military education program at SAIS. So I teach majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels about strategy, and we focus on space more than any of the other service schools. My background is as a political scientist, and so I'm probably the least qualified person to talk about space. And my journey is very much unplanned, and I'll talk about that a little bit as well.
Excellent. Thank you all for coming out today to share your journey, and I hope that you all picked up on all the different backgrounds and experiences that everyone has on this panel. And if you can kind of start thinking of some questions that reflect maybe where you are and what kind of thinking that you're doing, thinking about the next step, we'll go ahead and get started with some questions and then open it up to the audience. So first, I'm going to kick it to Lauren. Could you take a few minutes to discuss your career journey? How did you get where you are today, especially since you're a future Space Leader alum?
Sure. Thank you so much, Tiffany. So I guess before I talk about how I got to be a program manager, I'll talk a little bit about what does a program manager do, because I certainly did not go to school thinking that I wanted to be a program manager. I'm an engineer by training. Mechanical and aerospace engineering is my background, and my thesis work is in mechanisms and robotics. So what a program manager does, you're basically the captain of the ship of a program. There is one for every program, and you are responsible for the technical, financial, and schedule performance of a program. And so when I think about sort of what skills helped me to move into this career field and be successful as a program manager, I would really group it into sort of three major categories. The first one, I think, is people leadership. If you don't like people, don't manage people. I spend lots of time really working down and in with my teams and serving them and making sure that they have what they need to be successful. It's really why I do what I do. The second one is, sort of programmatic and technical acumen, right? Understanding how do you build a spacecraft? How do you build a rocket ship? There are all sorts of different technical subject areas that you can sort of get experience or specialize in. And then the third area, I would say, is sort of customer, government, and really just industry street smarts, right? How does stuff get done? How do programs happen? How do they get proposed? How do you win them? How do budgets work, right? So in those three kind of categories, and I understand that, I think, reflecting back on my career now, but I didn't know that those were really all of the experiences that I was gaining through the changes in my career over time. So much like Jim Free mentioned earlier, I did not start out saying this is the exact path to how I'm going to get where I want to get. So then stepping back from that, I did start my career at NASA Glenn Research Center. I worked in their simulated lunar operations lab, driving around robots in boxes of lunar simulant and pouring dust out of my shoes at the end of every day. It was really great hands-on experience, and I enjoyed it very much. I ended up joining Northrop Grumman and working in their autonomous systems, I guess kind of a sector now. I spent the first part of my career working in advanced concepts, sort of new, weird, fast things that were not necessarily part of our main. You might think of a Northrop Grumman or one of the bigger companies doing really big programs. I didn't really start off that way and start off as a mechanical engineer for advanced concepts. And what I think found in that position was that there were things that just needed to get done, and I didn't exactly know how to do them. And I really just stepped up and I tried to start contributing and helping and adding value. And I sort of adopted the motto early in my career that no job is too small to be done well. So if you get an assignment that's a small job, doing that really well, seeing it through to completion, treating it as if it's important and it's not beneath you, right? Every job being important. And in doing that, I had the opportunity to step into a program management role, and it was actually an innovation challenge that Northrop Grumman had to play the Harry Potter game of Quidditch with quadcopters inside. And so it was like GPS denied navigation and collision avoidance and all sorts of cool things. And I used to joke with my managers that I could watch Harry Potter and get paid for it. And then they looked scared, but I was like, just kidding, because that's not compliant. But anyway, so I had the opportunity to step in and take on that role in program management while I was still a mechanical engineer, really just because I saw there was a gap and there was a need for someone to do it. I didn't do it perfectly. I learned a lot in the experience. But after that, I did move into a program management role. And so since that time, I've sort of oscillated between, program management roles, leadership roles on, parts of larger programs. I've had a couple of different roles on the James Webb Space Telescope. I've worked some small satellite things. I've worked some things that I can't talk very much about. And worked some things in ground systems. And I've moved across the country, so I think this is my 4th or 5th city. But we bought a house, we're not moving. So that's what my husband always reminds me. We bought the house, we're not moving anymore. Our stuff will grow to fit the house. So, and we're based here in DC. So all that to say, all those experiences that I was gathering along the way, I didn't really have in mind that I wanted to be a program manager, but I realized, and I think you find this fit at a certain point where you're doing something and you're like, I feel a lot of fulfillment in doing this, right? This just kind of matches, it resonates with what I want to be doing with my life, and how I want to be engaging with people, and how I want to be contributing to this amazing industry. So that led me to being a program manager for the in-space refueling portfolio, which is a super awesome, amazing mission area that I would love to talk to you more about on one of the breaks. And yeah, it's been a wild ride. I don't think this is what I would have imagined for myself. But you just take it one day at a time. You try to do the best every role that you're in, and it works itself out in the end.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm going to kick it to Kate now to kind of add, how did you get to land the job that you have today? And I want to hear a little bit about those wolf dogs, too.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think we're probably going to have a theme here in terms of the thing that I'm doing now is not what I thought I would be doing if you asked me this like 20 years ago. So when I was in college, I knew that I loved studying people and studying what is the best way, the fastest way, the most efficient way to do something. So that is what led me into industrial and manufacturing engineering. But I almost switched to aerospace because I thought that the only way I could work for NASA was to be an aerospace engineer. And fortunately, I had an upperclassman mentor who said, Kate, NASA needs IEs too. And that is what kind of like told me like, okay, I'm doing the type of work, I'm studying the type of work I want to do. I have the trajectory because at that time, like NASA was the only place that you would be doing space stuff. Fast forward to, when it was announced that the space shuttle was gonna be retired. And I realized that the problem I wanted to solve was helping to restore America's access to space. And so that led me to commercial space. But I didn't have a GPA good enough to get into SpaceX or any of the other commercial space companies at the time. I had a 2.99. And because I was afraid that I would be found out, I didn't round up on my resume. So I probably should have retrospectively, but that's okay. It wouldn't have made a difference because at the time, like SpaceX's required GPA was 3.5 or 3.2, I can't remember. So I knew I had to go out and prove myself first. And I also knew that if I wanted to end up in space, why not take advantage of the ability to play around and get experiences under my belt that I loved and hated? Because I can't tell you how important it is to figure out what you don't want to do. It really helps you hone in on what your passions, where your passions are. And so I decided I would go into the automotive industry because there was a lot of high volume, rapid pace manufacturing. And I thought that is where space will go as well. So I graduated and I went to work for a company called GKN, 3 letters, first 3 letters of like the founders' names from, I don't know, the 1800s when the company was founded in England. So it's like one of the world's oldest engineering companies that nobody has probably heard of. They make the bits and pieces. They're basically a tier 1 supplier for the Boeings, the Lockheeds, the Northrops, as well as the Ford, the Chryslers, the Toyotas, and some like agricultural equipment like John Deere. So I got into their leadership development program where I got moved around every 6 months, and I actually got to live in England for a year. They paid me to go live in England, and they paid my rent to live in England. And I was working in the corporate headquarters, and one of the CEOs was a mentor, and he basically said, Kate, you can have my job in 15 to 20 years if you do this, this, and this. And that sounded awesome, because he was the CEO of the aerospace division of that company. I had been in automotive, and I was like, okay, I can make this transition, because the 3 letters CEO sounded so cool. And then I started doing those things, and I hated it. It was so boring. And I realized that I wasn't meant to build the pieces, I was meant to build the thing. And so I basically, when the opportunity came, this would have been in 2015, SpaceX was no longer building just one rocket every 2 years. They were trying to build 40 rockets in a year. So my background in high volume, high rate engineering or manufacturing allowed me to be a perfect fit for SpaceX at that time to help the company's production ramp up into high rate engineering or manufacturing that we see today, not only on the Falcon 9 and Dragon vehicles, but progressing that way with Starship as well. And I've been there for almost 10 years now, and I am a senior manager. I have friends that are directors, VPs, and CEOs, and I'm so happy for them, and I'm so happy for myself for where I am because I work in some really cool shit, to put it bluntly. So yeah, I've been there for 10 years, and I thought I was only going to make it like 2 or 3 because I really hated Los Angeles. I'm from the East Coast, so it was a lot to move out there, but it turns out if you give it a shot that it can be really great, and the people that I work with certainly make up for the rest of the people that live in Los Angeles.
Thank you, Kate. So Rikhi, as a Brooke Owens Fellow alum, can you talk about your journey and how you've gotten to where you are today? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say I love when really cool people share their stories with vulnerability and talk about their GPAs, because that's a part of my story as well. The Brooke Owens Fellowship was so transformative for me because it championed this holistic application process for these multifaceted individuals at a time where it felt as though your GPA and being a US citizen was the way to land these really coveted positions that I believe you have in the audience today. And as a foreign national and international student from Singapore, with at that point, gosh, I think it was when I applied like a 2.69, which I brought up to a 2.96 that through the journey that I'll share was actually rounded out by my graduate degree program folks, and I got a full ride to graduate school because I asked. But the Brooke Owens Fellowship, they essentially allowed me to share this story as a sophomore, junior with vulnerability, with humanity, and they saw my passion, and I got to interview with Emily Calandrelli, who's a Emmy-nominated Netflix show host, and in the hardest times during the pandemic, I got to work with her and work for her. That was really cool. And then I got to be matched with my executive mentor, Sirisha Bandla, because of whom I'm here speaking today. And she is the 3rd Indian origin woman to fly to space, which always just is so surreal to see that representation. And the unprecedented access to these leaders of that caliber and this peer group that was at all of these incredible universities and every aerospace hub and really every organization that you could think of working for, it really humanized their journeys because folks were really vulnerable and open with what they experienced, and they weren't closed off and cold like some of my peers back in university. And they essentially gave me the confidence and empowered me to be able to really reach out to anyone in any industry for an informational interview or to ask a couple questions. And it also compelled me to really understand the privilege that I had of having access to that kind of network, because had I not been chosen from Singapore, it could have been any other student. And I think recognizing that privilege, I feel that it's really important to continue sharing that with people from around the world, which led me to founding Singapore's first Women Leaders in Aerospace conference, where Lori Garver, the founder of our fellowship, spoke. And that really inspired so many students back in Singapore to rethink what they would do with the physics that they were learning in school and the opportunities available to them. And now it is really what drives me to share stories of wellness and taking care of yourself, because it's that retention piece that allows you to stay in the game and to be somewhere and to think introspectively and to think about the overlap of your strengths and interests. And yeah, I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be here. And I guess what I wanted to share is, for the people in the audience today, if you have an interest in this industry and you have had the opportunity to be born in the country, think of all the things that you can do with it and all the people you can really uplift, and how your hard work can really, really empower others. And there's about like 9 organizations that I can work for in the country, and I've tried to do my the most with what I've been given. But if you have access, just think through that, and I just wish you the best in what you do with it.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, and especially since I know that there's quite a few Brookies and Brookie alum in the audience. So definitely appreciate it. So Greg, thank you for being patient and letting the ladies talk first. And so I want to talk about your career and how it's a bit different, where it's more leaning towards the academic side of things. So how would you describe developing a more academic career, and what were some of the indicators throughout your career that led you where you are today?
Yeah, so I think the broad message that I'm going to try to convey is don't close any doors and don't ignore the small things, because you never know when those small things are actually going to be relevant later on. I graduated from UCLA, grew up in California.
Sorry to insult.
No, it's fine. I haven't been there in years. And came to Washington, D.C. for a master's program. I went to the Elliott School. I was doing security policy studies and got a job for Department of Justice. My plan was I was going to be the next Jack Ryan. I was going to work for an intel agency, get a PhD, and teach at the academy, and that was my goal. And I discovered in 2 years here that I really liked academia a whole lot more than I liked working for the government. And so I went on and got my PhD from Ohio State. And when I got to meet my advisor for the first time, he said, "What did you study at George Washington?" And I said, "Well, I did security studies, but my minor fields that I'm really interested in are terrorism and space." And he's like, "Do not study terrorism or space. There is no academic job market for those. You will not get a job in those fields. Study international relations, international security." And this was 1998. He was absolutely right. And so I studied international relations, and then 9/11 happened. And everyone in my department was looking around at each other and who can teach terrorism class? And I'm a grad student, but I can. I know a little bit about it. And for the next 15 years, I taught terrorism. 10 years in civilian universities, and then I joined Department of Defense and was teaching terrorism and strategy and a couple other things. And over 15 years, it drained me, studying some of the worst behavior of humans and no resolution in sight. And I, at the same time, got a job at the Air Command and Staff College teaching for the Air Force. And they had this new program they had started called the Schriever Space Scholars. And it was a space concentration for Air Force students that came to the school. And I kind of said, I'd be interested in getting involved in that. And I wasn't hired into it. I was teaching in the leadership department, but I started publishing on space. And I got back into space. I needed, pun intended, I needed something more uplifting than terrorism. And so I started writing about space, and they brought me into the program. I became the director of the program. When the director became the dean, and then when she left, I became the dean. And we are now here up in Washington, D.C. Space Force created its independent schools, and we're partnered with Johns Hopkins. So I went from basically in 5 years studying terrorism at a school in Alabama to now teaching about space at Johns Hopkins University and running a program. So most of my work on space actually draws on things that I've studied in the past that were less relevant to space. My first article was about space piracy. My second book is about space and science fiction. And it's just those things I wasn't expecting to be. I didn't, As a kid, I wasn't playing dean. I didn't expect to be a dean or an administrator, much less a civil servant. But you kind of go where your path takes you, and my dean, as the previous speaker said, my dean looked at me and said, "You're ready to be dean." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. I don't want to stop teaching." But she said, "No, we need you to do it. We need you to step in." I didn't have a low GPA. But in my graduate program, I had one of my professors in an evaluation at the end of the year saying, Greg will never make it as an academic. And that hit me pretty hard. And when I published my first book, I sent him a copy. So a little bit of revenge is always sweet, but the upside of that is that was actually a driving force for me. That compelled me to actually succeed. And I'm really happy where I am right now. I hate DC, but it's better than Alabama, so.
Hey. Huntsville's all right.
It is. Better than Montgomery, let me say.
Yes, I will second that opinion. All righty, so, and if you didn't know, NASA Marshall Space Flight Center is in Huntsville, Alabama. So I'm going to open it up to the audience for any questions that you all have. And so I see a question, right here. She had the pen.
Thank you. So I said before, but my name is Ashani Patti, and I'm interning with Space Commerce. I was a former Brooke Owens fellow, and I go to Georgia Tech, so go Jackets. My question's actually for you, Rikhi. You talked a lot about kind of wellness and prioritizing, how you're feeling and what your goals are, and understanding that despite kind of setbacks like a low GPA, but also maximizing what you're doing with the opportunity that you have in this industry. How do you strike a balance between that? Obviously, going to a school like Georgia Tech that can be very draining and academically rigorous, and this industry can be pretty cutthroat when you're getting into it, but there are so many great opportunities available. How do you focus on yourself but also maximize that?
Thank you for your question, Go Jackets. I think something that I learned early on is that one part of the international student experience is that we have to be really specific about our intention to pursue it, because there's only a short timeline within which we can pursue it, because there's a ticking clock of the visa, essentially. And no one gave me that heads up at the start of my journey. I learned that the hard way after I retook statics and after I retook thermodynamics. And the first time when I retook statics, I marched myself into the academic coach's office, and they were these trained professionals at the university that used the money that we were paying for the school to teach us about time management and had a lot of free resources. And so I worked with someone to really understand how I could balance at that time the competitive dance team that I was on and the competitive design build fly team that I was on. And I didn't have the language to describe what wellness meant and what mental health was. And there wasn't this, there wasn't any discourse online, and there wasn't any discourse in the classes, and there wasn't any discourse from the professors. And I think through the creativity that the Brooke Owens Fellowship compelled us to engage in with the application process, I started to understand a little bit more about introspection. And I think a way to dip your toe into introspection when you're an undergraduate student is to look at these questions that graduate schools ask you, or fellowships or scholarships. I think when they ask you about why in your story, you're prompted to reflect. But I think the wellness piece really came in during 2020, and I think I started with meditating because I had 90 days to figure out whether I could get into graduate school or find a job or go back home to Singapore. And honestly, at that point, I would have tried anything. And so I started with meditation, and I layered on journaling, and I ended up getting fully funded for my master's degree at Georgia Tech and graduated with a 4.0. And I didn't get magically smarter. I just started to meditate and journal. And so during that time, I started to tell other students just about what I was doing and realized that there are so many things that pull you in so many different directions, and there's so many things that we pick up, and it is a felt experience, even if we can't articulate it. And there are so many tools that are available to us if we are sometimes brave enough to ask, to help us metabolize that felt experience through whatever we choose to do, whether that's running or an MMA class or journaling or an academic coach or any other form of coach. And there's so much that you can do to overcome that, so that the next time you step into these rooms, you can really leave with that 4.0 or what you desire, and also through introspection know what your strengths are and when you've had enough and when you'd like to pivot and when you'd like to ask a question and reach out to someone because you're curious about something.
All righty, we have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to have one more question from the audience, and then we'll wrap up the panel. So, anybody still hold? All right. And we will be here during break, so if you didn't get a chance to answer your question, please come up. Go ahead.
I wanted to, thank all the panelists. All your stories are very uplifting. As a young professional, not knowing exactly where I'm going, hearing the stories of not knowing are, very reassuring. So this is a question specifically for Kate. You mentioned that you came out of college and you were looking into fields, and you didn't feel like the aerospace industry was quite ready to accept you quite yet. So you went to automotive. My question is, how do you find those doors that are open to you and that provide mobility into those fields? You mentioned automation, right? And you seeing how that is the future of space. How did you see that? How did you come to that realization? And what suggestions do you have?
I wish I could say that there's a crystal ball, but it kind of goes back to what you had said, don't close any doors. That includes the things that you study, the things that you experience, and the people that you know. I feel as though the place where the space industry now is nothing like what it's going to be in 10 to 15 years. As I said before, 20 years ago, I would not have been able to say this is what I want to be when I grow up. I still can't answer that question, to be fair. I try to stay open to experiences and push myself in ways that scare me, because I know that that's where growth and opportunity are. But in terms of being able to see and be able to take advantage of those opportunities, for the way that my brain works, I'm a bit like a shotgun, where my attention, my interests are like this. And there are some people that are like snipers, where they're super focused and dedicated to this one thing. So I know a lot about a lot of things, but I am not an expert in any one thing. And that has allowed me to be able to be flexible and to be able to work with people, because engineering is hard, people are harder. I think you said something great. If you don't like people, don't manage people. I find that the most challenging parts of my day are working with people that have different opinions. And some of the things that have really enabled my success are the skills that I built in the people department. Leadership classes, communication classes. Oh my gosh, if I could go back, actually I have done this. I took a communications class for engineers that was specifically about how do you present technical information to non-technical audiences. If you're working on a really cool project, but you can't ask for money in a way that gets you the money, your project's gonna sink. The same way goes for proposing development growth on a project. And I honestly think that it's the fact that I did everything in college, from floral arranging, which is not a joke. There was actually a class for floral arranging, and I was senior enough that I could get into it. And that is something that I do in my free time. I always say that if I win the lottery and I, for some weird reason, don't want to work in space anymore, I would open up a flower shop, because I love doing floral arranging. To the communication classes, to just taking advantage of every learning opportunity that you can, and conferences like these, and meeting people, because the people in the back of and the sides of this room want to help. Actually, Patricia, you told me this once before. We want to help. but we don't always know how. We need you to ask us, and we are happy to introduce you to people that we know and open those doors. But if you don't raise your hand and say, hey, I'm looking to get into this thing, even if it's just for a summer internship, go have fun, try new things. We would love to point you in the right direction. Sometimes we want to help, but we don't know how to help you until you come to us and say, I have an interest in learning more about this thing, whether it's automation or something technical or something people related. Yeah.
All righty, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. So we have another speaker coming before the next break. So just in 5 seconds, I'm going to start with Greg and work our way. Would you all please provide one piece of advice to everyone in the audience on how or what they should do when they're searching for their next job? Like, what is that one key thing you think they really need to do? Greg?
This sounds cliched and trite, but be open to anything? Sorry.
I was going to say something similar. It kind of goes back to what I said before. Try the things that you're not sure if you'll like, because if it turns out that you don't like it, that's fantastic. That's just as important as trying something that you end up loving.
Make your resume into a website or multimedia portfolio so that when you're networking and asking questions, someone can click on the link and learn about your whole story. And mine is pink, like Legally Blonde pink, so make it any color you want.
I would say the personal connection cannot be underestimated, right? So, I mean, at a company like Northrop Grumman, we have so many people who apply online, and sometimes really good people fall through the cracks. And it's important, I think, for you to make those reach outs to people, the cold calls, reaching out on LinkedIn, becoming a known person and not just another person in the queue, leveraging events like this, but also being creative about it. I think one time I actually called a university that had a career fair, that had some people attending the career fair that weren't at my school's career fair, and I asked them if I could attend their career fair, and they were like, well, no one's asked us that before, so sure, because we don't really have a response for you. So be creative about how you leverage other networks, even that you don't have access to, and just become known and be yourself, because you don't want to work for anyone who doesn't want you just the way you are.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate the panel. Everyone give them a hand up.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tiffany, and all the panelists. What a great conversation and insight.